Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking Democracy. I'm Darrell Hamlin, your host. Today we're meeting with Fort Hays State University Professor of Biology, Dr. Greg Farley, who's been serving the Hays community for many years. Dr. Farley also manages FHSU's bird banding site, a source of great research found in only a few places on the North American continent. Today we'll learn about that research and we'll discuss the truth about cats and birds and what that means for the community today on Talking Democracy. Welcome back to Talking Democracy. Our guest today is Dr. Greg Farley of the Biology Department at Fort Hays State University. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Darrell.
Before we get too much down into the bird business, tell us about yourself.
Well, I moved to Hays from New Mexico. I worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service after getting my graduate degree at the University of New Mexico. And I came here largely to teach. That's why I love Fort Hays. Despite my research background, it was a good opportunity to spend time with students. And one of the first things I noticed when I walked into my new office, there was a pile of bird data from this bird banding site from my predecessor, and a new opportunity presented itself literally the first day I walked onto campus.
Did you know anything about this research before you came here?
I really didn't. It was one of the few things. There was a desk and file cabinet, and I didn't know. I had some idea that my predecessor had done bird banding, but I had no idea the quality of the work or that I would inherit over 25 years worth of high quality data. It was a real nice surprise.
What kind of courses do you teach?
I teach, every semester I teach zoology, so I meet most of the biology majors as either freshmen or sophomores. I teach a general education course called Global Environmental Issues. That course I've come to really love. It has a large international component. Students from Saudi Arabia and China, as well as in Western Kansas, make a really nice mix for that course. I teach evolution, an animal behavior class, and ornithology, my specialty. I teach that in spring.
Just to let our audience know a little bit about how successful you've been at Fort Hays, you've won the Pilot Award, the Navigator Award, and the President's Distinguished Scholar Award. You've had quite a run.
I've been very fortunate, worked with some great people, and I'd say all three of those awards are focused on student effort as well. I've had a great group of students to work with.
What have you enjoyed the most in your time here?
I think changing my approach. I came in with a rather traditional approach to teaching. I'm a biology teacher. We tend to teach content and complex material, but I've learned to kind of work outside of that traditional environment. I realize that student efforts in other activities outside the classroom. I go to leadership events and learn about how to engage students in different ways and really give them the skills they need to succeed outside of academia. So I've actually learned that a lot of different methods can be used to meet students halfway.
Can you give us an example of something you do different than you did when you first started teaching?
One of the biggest things is I now am very good about just changing approaches. If I walk in one day, the students don't seem to be engaged, it's the day after spring break, I might find it in me to take them outside, and we built models of annelid, of earthworm digestive systems 2 weeks ago, just for fun with Play-Doh, 10 minutes outside the classroom. But it sounds childish, but it's really a good way to get them to interact. Today I did a very good thing in a zoology class. I had 20 or 30 minutes to spare. I have an exam on Wednesday. I let students do studying in groups, and I go around and work in modules, and each group separates themselves in terms of what they want to study, and I can have them teach one another and then respond to their questions in a group. So just different approaches, not the traditional podium-only method.
I bet you're not the only person who's changed. How have students changed in the time that you've been here?
I do think students have varied interests. If I really selected one thing, it would be the number of hours they spend working off campus. I think that's probably the biggest change, is most students will have minimum 20 hours of work, some efforts up to 40 or more hours of work outside of academia. And that's tough. I don't care what your job is, but to have a separate full-time job makes it very hard to succeed. So balancing that financial responsibility with the academic needs of a full course load, I think that's becoming more and more difficult for your typical student.
Well, I think we've reached a time for a break right here. When we come back, we'll start talking a little bit more about bird banding.
All right.
In the Media Studies Department at Fort Hays State University, opportunities are there for the taking. Media Studies students are taught the abilities and skills needed to succeed in collegiate and professional life. Within the department, students are able to learn, develop, and perfect their skills by producing award-winning shows and broadcasting live on radio. With the hands-on experience available, the Media Studies Department offers students the experience for their future today.
Euthanization has decreased 22% since the 1970s. However, approximately 6 to 8 million dogs and cats are put in animal shelters each year, with 3 to 4 million of those being euthanized. Today's average animal shelter contains over 25% of dogs that are purebreds. Most pets come to find themselves in shelters for a variety of reasons: family tragedies, unlucky circumstances, or irresponsible owners. It is only with help from people like you that we can help prevent the overpopulation problem. Adopt a pet from your local Humane Society. Even if you can't adopt a pet, contact your local animal shelter and find a way to get involved. Volunteers are always needed. Please be a responsible pet owner. Save a life. Add some joy to your own world.
This is Timmy. He's a smart boy that treats others well. Like all young boys, Timmy enjoys a good candy bar. Wait, what's happening now? Did Johnny just take your candy? Well, that wasn't very nice of him, was it, Timmy? Let's show Johnny how a respectful young man should act. What do you say, Timmy? Where'd you go, Timmy? Oh, looks like they're patching things up quite nicely.
Be courteous. It's not that hard.
Gee, mister, really?
Welcome back to Talking Democracy. Our guest today is Dr. Greg Farley of the Biology Department. We got to know a little bit about you in the last segment. Tell us about your research with the bird banding project.
The interesting thing about this is a long-term data project. And so we now have 45 years worth of data. It's collected every year in the same location, exactly the same way, over the same time interval. So it's a very nice comparison. And the beauty of long-term data is unless you have started the project a long time ago, you don't have the data to ask the kinds of questions you might want to ask. So it's like any good sampling. It's like getting your blood pressure checked once a year. Your physician has a nice record of what you were like when you were 30. Now at age 50, there's a nice reference point to make. And so this data set allows students and myself to ask questions about how populations have changed over time. Have bird numbers of a particular species gone up? Have they gone down? Have they stayed the same? Regardless, we can then ask additional questions. What factors have influenced those populations to increase, decrease, or in some cases stay the same? So it's a wonderful long-term data set and really unique in about a 7 or 8 state area. There's only about a half dozen study sites in North America with this long-term data like we have at Fort Hays State. It's very remarkable.
Have you been able to publish the results of some of this with students?
Yes, I have. We've had presentations at international meetings, at national meetings, regional meetings, and state meetings as well, and I've published in journals with students, both graduate and undergraduate. So the success rate for the students who volunteer and occasionally get paid to help on the site, I'm very proud of them. It's very spectacular, I think.
And of course that helps if they decide they want to go on to an academic career as well.
Or as a researcher or to work for an agency. It can help in a couple of ways. And I think the best way, and it took me years to figure this out, it just helps focus your studies in the classroom. You can make connections. You have these animals in hand, you're working in a team with other students, and you realize that there's a benefit to all that hard work. In addition, while we're waiting for the birds to get caught in the nets, a lot of the students study together. And so there's a nice little club or team mentality that goes on, and I think that benefits everybody, including the animals. They do a better job handling the animals because they work as a group.
I'm sure they learn a lot from each other.
They definitely do.
So what have you been learning from this research?
I think the most interesting discoveries recently, one was with an undergraduate student who's now one of my graduate students. He was asking questions about whether changes in global climate have affected the time of year that the birds arrive. So every fall I put the nets up in the same locations along Big Creek, and we looked at the 10 most common species over the last 20 years to see if they've changed their arrival dates relative to 20 years back. So we looked at my predecessor's data and then my 20 years worth of data. And this is the beauty of science. The first of the 10 species he looked at showed a remarkable difference. Animals are now arriving 2 weeks earlier than they used to in our first 20-year sample. So that was a nice discovery. The other 9 species have not changed. And that's the nature of science. You make investigations, sometimes you predict the answer, and it's just as interesting when you don't predict the answer. Once the first species came back as arriving so much earlier, we of course thought all of them would look that way. But no, he happened by chance to pick the one species that changed. So some have changed due to global climate adjustment, or so we hypothesize, and others have not.
I'm curious, what would make it change for some due to climate, but not for others?
Exactly. I think there are other variables out there in the environment, whether their nesting success is going up and down. Disease is another factor. I think the other interesting discovery we've made is I work with other students and a colleague of mine, Dr. Eric Gillick, who's a virologist, and we've looked at organisms that carry West Nile virus, and more recently, bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. And so these birds are a part of the environment, and we use the birds as sampling elements to tell us what bacteria are out there in the world. And their samples from their mouths, have indicated there's quite a high level of bacteria that carry resistant genes to the antibiotics you and I use for health purposes. And that's a very important discovery, I think.
So how do you catch the birds in the nets?
We put up, it's a passive capture method. These are nets that were developed in Japan, and the nets are very darkly colored. And on a morning where it's dark out or a little bit cloudy, the birds don't see the nets because light is not as continuous in woodlands. And they fly into the net, fold up their wings because they feel that resistance, and they fall into a bag, and the net is capturing that animal pretty effectively. It takes a lot of training. The students have shown consistently the skills it takes to extract the animal safely. Some do it very well, some take more practice like any tool, but I've had students who do the work with me, and then the next summer they've worked in places as disparate as Hawaii, Washington State, and Florida, because this is a very good technical skill, handling captured birds in nets, and my students are often quite good at it.
So are the birds vulnerable while they're in these nets?
They are, and that may be part of what we talk about in a little bit. They're definitely vulnerable to predators. Normally, predators are out only at night. Occasionally, a bird of prey will come in and take one of our birds out of the net. That may happen once a year, maybe once every 2 years. So it's a rather infrequent event normally. We check the nets about every 5 to 10 minutes, and so the animals are usually extracted prior to any harm coming to them. That's the whole purpose, is to handle the live animal, send it on its merry way to fly to Nicaragua or Venezuela or wherever it happens to go.
What about cats? Tweety Bird warned us they're a problem.
Cats are a big issue, and that's really one of the reasons I wanted to come and talk to you today. Cats on my study site have become an increasing problem over the last few years, but this is an issue that's not just a U.S. issue, it's really an international issue. Cats, if you put them in the right ecological framework, are a non-native predator. They're a human pet, they're a domesticated organism, and when they escape from human care, they become a non-indigenous predator. Estimates in the U.S. based on pet food sales and veterinary work, there are about 100 million house cats in the U.S., and we estimate there are approximately 60 to 100 million additional feral cats, meaning cats that do not respond to human care.
Are there more cats than there have been before?
Yes, the curve is a rather steeply ascending slope, whether it's the house cat population curve or the affiliated feral cat population.
So what do you think is going on with that?
Well, there's a number of issues, and I think the big concern is these non-managed cat populations kill staggering numbers of individuals. I was at a meeting with the undergraduate I referenced earlier, International Ornithological Conference, a year and a half ago, and the estimates are now 2.5 billion, as in big, billion birds are killed annually by cats in the United States. Another 12 billion mammals are killed by cats, as well as approximately 500 million amphibians and 500 million reptiles. That's a lot of native wildlife to be consumed or maimed by these, again, non-indigenous species of predator. And that's what our house cats are.
So our cat that has been spayed and that we leave out when the weather is good, you're telling me she might be a serial killer of some sort.
She is. There's been some very good work. BBC, a friend sent me a link just last week. BBC has put GPS units on cats. And there's a group, the American Bird Conservancy, which has published videos, little go cams on the back of kitties. And in both instances, the distance these house cats travel, whether it's your pet house cat, not the feral cat, I'm speaking now of the pet that's in your home at night and getting milk in the morning, whatever the care might be, these animals roam and kill on average a little over 2.5 animals per week. They only bring about 20% of those prey items home. So if you see a mouse or a bird or a snake or a frog once a month, that's 1/5 of the animals that that cat is actually killing. What they're actually maiming is another percentage that's very difficult to estimate. But as I've said, 2.4 or higher billion birds per year, that's an anthropogenic source of mortality that we can influence very well. It's not something we have no control over. We really need to do a better job of controlling these
Fort
animals.
Hays has had a feral cat problem in the past, and some groups have actually tried to kind of collect them and have them spayed or neutered or do those kinds of things. That sounds like it's all good.
It does sound like it's good. We had a program in Hays. Our former animal control officer, who was extremely professional and very good at her job, that was one of their efforts to control feral cat populations. The challenge with these trap, neuter, release programs is if you go to websites for these organizations, they're very well intended. I want to say that right up front. The psychology behind it, I think, is one of caring for the animals. I'm here to lobby for the organisms that don't have as many persons lobbying for them. Butterflies, crickets, snakes, frogs, native mice, songbirds, you name it. The challenge is, unless you neuter or spay between 70 and 94% of the animals in the colony grows. And so the intention of trap, neuter, release, if you read the original literature, is to manage the colony so individuals die at their own rate. It's to avoid euthanasia. And it's a very kind concept. Again, the assumption is all the animals don't reproduce, or at least a high enough percentage. There's no immigration of new animals, and therefore over time the colony will shrink.
But if the animals who are gathered there haven't been fixed, so to speak, then it's really like a single spar and they're just meeting each other.
It is. And what's not discussed openly in trap, neuter, release is we also feed the animals. So it's really trap, neuter, release, and feed. If you provide animals with food and you allow them to physically reproduce because they're not spayed or neutered, and individual animals can join the colony either because people drive by and drop off an unwanted kitty, or they sense the food and move in, or the potential mates, it's inevitable that the colony will grow. And the only I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
The only successful example in the U.S. is in Florida, where they did a great job with a lot of volunteer effort, and they did manage to reduce the size of the colony. But that's an example. The vast majority of cases, populations inevitably grow, and they kill, and that's a problem.
Well, we're going to have to kill the conversation for a moment and go to a break.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Thank you.
How to drink and drive. Step 1. Find and consume alcohol. Step 2. Get through your friends and or family and find your car. Step 3. Wish yourself luck and take off. Don't drink and drive. It's not worth the risk.
This isn't a good lifestyle to have. Quit hitting the snooze button. Get up and go in the morning. Feeling fresh and clean helps boost your self-confidence. Start your day with some fruits and breads, like oatmeal. Exercise releases endorphins that make you feel happy and energetic. Live healthy.
That's teamwork.
Welcome back to Talking Democracy. Our guest today is Dr. Greg Farley of the Biology Department at Fort Hays State University. We've been talking about birds. What else can you tell us about your research? Is there any kind of public health problem associated with the cats and the birds that we've been talking about?
Again, that's an interesting point. Again, these trap, neuter, release, and feed facilities are now not uncommon in several states in the United States, actually many states, and a number of communities. And because of the concentration of the food, and often housing is provided as well, again, the intention is very positive. It's psychologically, it's well-intended efforts to care for these animals, but their densities can reach 10 to 100 times what a native predator density would be. And so we're looking at a very large footprint. And as I alluded to earlier, even though a fair percentage of these animals are trying to be spayed, spayed and neutered cats still kill. And so an evil experiment that I kind of reference when I give these talks is, even if you have a fat and happy kitty, and my kitties have been fat and happy, I take care of them probably too well, but if you take a spayed or neutered cat, toss it in the bathroom, and shut the door and make sure there's a living animal in there with it. Make sure the bathtub has a frog, as I said earlier, a bird or a mouse. I think we know the outcome of 10 minutes of those two in there together. The cat will respond to a stimulus and kill the animal. So there's some significant impacts of having predator densities, again, 10 to 100 times background predator densities. One of the big issues from a public health perspective is there's several diseases that humans can pick up that are carried by cats. And not to be unpleasant if this is a dinner time viewing, but one of them is toxoplasma. It's carried in fecal matter of cats. And each of these animals, let's say you have a neighbor who cares for or hoards, is not an unfair term, 15 or 18 cats that they feed out of their garage, the neighborhood is being affected by those animals. Those animals are defecating twice a day in some surface that they can access. So it's not the lawn, it's not the sidewalk, it's your front garden, it might be the sandbox in the backyard, and they're going many houses away from the house where they're fed, and they can carry toxoplasma and other kinds of risks to in this case, pregnant women, or ringworm is another issue, and both of those have increased in prevalence in areas where these facilities are located. I think most of your viewers would be stunned to realize the largest carrier of rabies last several years in the United States, according to the Center for Disease Control, is cats. It's not what we would think of historically, a species of bat, possibly skunk, maybe a feral dog. It's cats, and so these animals are not all cared for and properly inoculated. And I would argue that even if philosophically your objective is to care for the cats, I don't think this is doing kindness to those cats in terms of what the fate of many of them is.
Is there any kind of economic impact that these cats have?
I think potentially there is. I think losing large numbers of native wildlife, undoubtedly, think of the canary in the coal mine metaphor, undoubtedly has some effects, not all of which we can easily quantify. But I think there's no question that breaking up natural cycles, whether they're bird and insect, and the insects that the birds consume, or rodents and some of the other effects they have which are positive, I think removing them can have some negative impacts.
Well, is there any kind of humane solution to this problem?
I think this is a tough issue because it tends to polarize the people involved. I think you have extreme positions, like with any issue, that probably are not reasonable in terms of having discussions. If you read the veterinary medicine literature, the vast majority of veterinarians recognize that when it comes to managing populations of non-domesticated animals, we really do have to consider euthanasia as one of those steps. Ideally, we might never euthanize an animal and allow them to maintain their lives until they die. The problem is they reproduce, and if we provide food, they reproduce at a greater rate, and our population problem does not go away. It's exacerbated and becomes a population explosion. And again, an interesting way to look at house cats, and I don't know why we view house cats or feral cats, which are by definition non-domesticatable cats, why we view them differently from other kinds of domestic animals. Imagine as my neighbor, and you and I live close to one another, if I had several goats or pigs that I raised, and when I went to work, I let them roam. During the night, they're in my barn, I lock them up, but during the day, they roam the neighborhood, and they consume your shrubbery, or they continue to break into your garden and eat your vegetables. You'd be very upset about that.
Well,
you wouldn't tolerate it.
We have city ordinances and regulations about that kind of thing.
We do, but cats somehow don't quite get enforced. It's 4 animals, I believe, in the city of Hayes. And again, I think to push my example a little further, if we had feral packs of dogs chasing our children home from school, that problem would be dealt with very swiftly and appropriately. But cat numbers, we don't seem to follow through quite the same way. So we do have individuals in town that either knowingly or inadvertently maintain large numbers of these semi-feral, semi-domestic animals.
So do we need new regulations or just better enforcement of the ones we have?
Being the academic that I am, and I'm an educator at heart, I still think information is the best way, Daryl. I think we try to inform the public and say, during migration season, maybe keep your kitty indoors so that exhausted bird getting a drink of water doesn't get killed before it flies south to its wintering grounds. Or maybe we educate people and say there are actually some health risks to your neighbors if you maintain unhealthy large numbers of individuals. Or we possibly ask the City of Hayes to evaluate whether maintenance of these trap, neuter, and release and feed colonies is really in the best interest of the health of Hayes, whether it's economic health, public health, or I'd even argue environmental health in terms of all the animals that live in this particular community.
So then, what's the worst case scenario if we don't get a handle on this problem?
I think we end up long term, and you see this occasionally in pockets where house cat populations get very high. You have a population that consists of house cats. You've lost your other native wildlife. You've lost pollinating butterflies, you've lost cicadas, you've lost snakes, you've lost songbirds, you've lost bats. I walk my dog the same couple blocks every day, and every couple weeks I'll see a cat with an object in its mouth. Several blocks from my house, somebody maintains a small colony of cats. I've seen them with rodents in their mouth, rabbits, garter snake, a bat, several species of bird, and multiple examples of small insects, cicadas, butterflies, etc. So that's my little tiny sample, but large numbers of cats will have a significant negative impact on our populations of native wildlife. I think a town that consists of feral pigeons and house cats is a far less interesting world for us to look at or listen to than a healthy, diverse prairie environment.
And just to be clear, again, we're not really just talking about a feral cat problem.
We're talking also about your kitty at home. So it's not just the feral cats that roam, it's the house cat that gets let out during the day or at night to do what house cats do outside. And even though Tabby is well fed and even neutered or spayed, many of them are still normal behaving cats where they respond to a stimulus of movement, they chase it, they kill it. And even that bird that you release and tell yourself, oh, it's going to be fine, that bird in 99.9% of the cases will not be fine. It will just die outside of your sight. So the fate is usually sealed once they're bitten.
So if a person is taking care of their cat because they care about the cat and they love it, what is a citizen supposed to do to take better care of their community?
I think the American Bird Conservancy as well as the Humane Society of the United States have recommended 2 things. Consider keeping your cat indoors. So a lot of people now have indoor kitties. They have the advantages of a cat purring on your chest when you read a book. I happen to like that. Again, I like cats despite this conversation. So you keep your cat indoors and just separate them from the risk of killing native wildlife. But you can put your kitty on a leash. People walk their cats even though it seems a little bit strange, but if your cat wants outdoor backyard time, it's at least controlled by you. Or you limit your cat's access to the out of doors to times of year when maybe many animals are not so vulnerable. Don't let it outside when your bird feeder is filled in winter, so the kitty can sit underneath the feeder and eat its own lunch. Maybe try to avoid putting them outside again during migration, or don't let the animal hang out near, say, a water supply in summer where native wildlife will be coming in to drink. So maybe controlling our behavior is really what this is about. This is not a cat problem, Daryl. I'd argue this is a human problem. We've domesticated these animals, and we're responsible to manage them fairly and properly, and letting them roam and increase in population size is uncontrolled by us, I do not think is appropriate wildlife management.
Well, on that note, I think we finished our conversation for today, but we want to thank you for joining us and telling us about your research.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Our guest today was Dr. Greg Farley. Thank you for being our guest. It's always a pleasure to have you. We encourage our viewers to check out Talking Democracy and other services offered by the Tiger Media Network at tmn.fhsu.edu.